At Eleanor's diner, on the corner where Maple Street meets the River Road, the corner stool has belonged to one man for as long as most of the town can remember. Same stool, same hour, a little after 6. Same order, every single morning, given in the same 4 quiet words. 2 coffees, please, Eleanor. And then he sits, and he drinks one, and he never touches the other. His name is Sam. He is 71 years old, though he carries it lightly, the way a man does when he has stopped counting. He wears the same grey coat through 3 seasons of the year and a heavier one through the 4th. He is the first customer through the door most mornings, before the bread truck, before the light is properly up over the water. And the second coffee sits across from him, full, going cold, every day. For 11 years now, this has been the shape of his mornings. The waitresses have come and gone. The prices on the little chalkboard have changed 4 or 5 times. The town has aged around that stool, but the 2 coffees have stayed exactly the same, like a clock that keeps a time only one person can read. Now, every town has its quiet legends, and Ashford is no different. The 2 coffees became one of ours. People had a feeling about it long before anyone had a fact. You'd see a stranger ask about it, a salesman passing through, a young couple stopping for pie, and you'd watch a regular lean over and explain it in a low, knowing voice, the way you pass on something tender. And the explanation the town settled on was a beautiful one. It went like this. Sam had a wife once. Her name was Rose, and she was lovely, and she's gone now, and every morning that old man buys her a cup of coffee and sits with the empty place where she used to be, because that is how a good man keeps a marriage going after one half of it has died. It is a lovely story. People told it gently, and they wiped their eyes a little when they did, and they felt better about the world for knowing it. The 2 coffees became proof for the whole of Ashford that love outlasts everything, even the person. And nobody ever asked Sam whether it was true. You don't interrupt a thing that beautiful to check it, so for 11 years no one asked. The town had its answer, and the answer was kind, and that was enough. The not asking became part of the ritual too. Sam ordered, the town nodded knowingly, and everybody left the old man to his grief, which they were certain they understood completely. If you want to know how deep a town legend can run, watch what happens when a stranger asks. A few summers back, a young couple stopped in for pie on their way through, and the man nodded at the corner stool and asked Eleanor, just curious, what the story was with the 2 coffees. 3 separate regulars answered him at once, all the same way, all in that hushed and reverent tone, "It's for his late wife," as though they were letting him in on something holy. The couple left misty-eyed. The regulars felt good about themselves. Sam, who had heard the whole exchange from 10 feet away, said nothing and drank his coffee and let it stand. That is how a story becomes furniture. Everyone leans on it, nobody questions it, and after a while it holds up the whole room. The town was not lying about Sam. They believed every word of it. They had simply decided years before what the second cup meant, and a decision like that has a way of quietly closing the door behind it. The kindest people in Ashford walk straight past the actual answer every single morning, because they were already holding one they liked better. There's a detail most people miss. When you decide you already know why someone does a thing, you stop actually looking at them. You look at your story about them instead. For 11 years, the whole town had been looking at a beautiful story and not at Sam at all. And then, one ordinary Tuesday in early spring, a girl named Nora started her third shift at Eleanor's diner. She was 19, new to Ashford, sharp-eyed in the way of people who haven't yet learned which questions a town has agreed not to ask. And she watched the old man in the grey coat order 2 coffees and drink one, and she did the thing nobody in Ashford had done in over a decade. She wondered out loud. Eleanor caught her arm by the coffee machine. "We don't ask Sam about the second cup," she said, low and firm, the way you'd warn someone off a loose floorboard. "It's for his late wife. Leave him be." And Nora nodded, because you nod on your third shift. But she kept watching, and something about the way the old man looked at that second cup didn't match the story she'd just been told. Because here is what Nora noticed, that nobody who'd known Sam for years had let themselves see anymore. He didn't look at the empty stool the way a grieving man looks at a ghost. He didn't talk to it. He didn't set it a place out of habit and then forget it was there. Every morning, when he finished his own coffee, he stood up and he slid that second full cup down the counter, away from himself, toward the door, toward whoever might come in next. It was a small thing. You'd miss it if you'd decided already what you were seeing. But Nora hadn't decided yet. So on the 4th morning, when Eleanor was in the back and the diner was empty and grey light was just coming up off the river, Nora set his coffee down in front of him, and instead of walking away, she stayed, and she asked him, "Who's the second one for?" Sam looked up at her, and he did not look like a man who'd been waiting 11 years for someone to ask. He looked like a man surprised that anyone had. He held her eye for a moment, and then he looked down the counter at that full cup, and he said something that did not fit the town's story at all. He said, "It was never for Rose. Rose would have laughed at me, sitting here talking to an empty chair." And then he said, "Sit down a minute if Eleanor won't mind. It's a longer story than the coffee. To understand the second cup, you have to go back, not 11 years, closer to 50, back to when this same diner had a different name and a different counter, and the man at the corner stool wasn't an old man at all. He was 23, and he was new in Ashford, and he was lonelier than he would ever admit to anyone for the next 5 decades. Sam had come to Ashford for work that didn't last, and stayed for reasons he couldn't have named at the time. He had no family here. He took a room above the hardware store, and he ate most of his meals at the diner on the corner because it was cheaper than cooking for one, and because the lights were on and other people were there. And when you are 23 and alone, sometimes that is the whole of what you need from a place. He wasn't good at people in those years. He'd come in, take the corner stool, drink his coffee and leave without a word to anyone. He told himself he liked it that way. Most people who tell themselves that are lying, and Sam was no exception, but he was a thorough enough liar that he half believed it. And then there was Rose. Rose worked the morning shift at the diner, the way some people do a thing they were simply built for. She wasn't loud. She wasn't one of those waitresses who calls everyone honey and remembers your birthday. She was quieter than that and quicker. She watched the room. And she had a habit that took Sam the better part of a year to even notice, because she did it so plainly that it disappeared. Every few mornings, Rose would quietly pay for somebody's breakfast. Not announce it, not make a moment of it. She'd see a man counting coins twice at the register, or a woman with 2 children and a tired face, or a young fellow in the corner who'd been nursing 1 coffee for 3 hours because he had nowhere else warm to be. And she'd just quietly tell the till it was taken care of, and go on wiping down the counter as if nothing had happened. There was the winter she fed the Callaway boy. He was maybe 17, with a home situation nobody in town talked about, and nowhere warm to land after school. And for the better part of 3 months, he would come into the diner and make 1 cup of cocoa last until closing. Rose never said a word to him about it. She just started somewhere in there, bringing him a plate of whatever hadn't sold, the end of the soup, a slab of day-old pie, and setting it down in front of him as if she'd rung up an order wrong, and would he mind helping her out by eating it so it didn't go to waste. He always minded. He always ate it. He grew up and left Ashford and did well for himself, and to this day he does not know he was being fed. There was the February old Mrs. Dean's heat went out, and her pension would not stretch to fix it, and a man from the gas company turned up at her door one morning, unasked, and set it right with no bill and no explanation. Mrs. Dean spent the rest of her life convinced the gas company had simply made a generous mistake in her favour. Rose let her believe it. That was the whole craft of the thing, not just the giving, but the cover story that let the other person keep their pride completely intact. She kept no list that anyone ever found. She did not tithe to it, or talk about it, or tally it up at the end of the year to feel good. It was simply the shape of how she moved through a town. Wherever the floor was about to give out under somebody, Rose was quietly there with a board and a nail, and gone again before anyone could turn around to thank her. Go back to the morning Sam first caught her doing it. It was January, and it was bitter, and a man Sam half recognized, somebody's out-of-work son, the kind of man a town starts to look past, came in shivering and ordered the cheapest thing on the board and started counting out change with red, shaking hands. And before he'd finished counting, Rose was already at the till, already saying it was handled, already turned away so the man wouldn't have to thank her and feel small about it. Sam watched the whole thing from the corner stool, and what struck him wasn't the money, it was the turning away. Rose had figured out the hardest part of kindness, the part most kind people never learn, that the giving matters less than letting the other person keep their dignity while they take it. She made the man feel lucky, not pitied. And Sam, who was an expert in being quietly proud and quietly broke, understood exactly what she'd spared that fellow. So one morning, clumsy and 24 by then, Sam asked her about it. He'd worked up to it for a week. "Why do you do that?" he said. "Pay for people. You don't make much. I've seen your shoes." It was not a smooth thing to say. Rose looked at him for a second, deciding something, and then she gave him the answer that would, though neither of them could possibly have known it, still be running the corner stool half a century later. She said, "Somebody did it for me once, when I needed it and couldn't ask. I never got to pay her back because I never knew who she was. So I figured the only way to clear the debt was to keep handing it down. You don't pay it back, you pay it forward. And you don't keep score, and you don't sign your name to it." Then she topped up his coffee, which he hadn't asked her to, and didn't charge him for the refill, and walked away before he could say anything at all. That was the morning Sam fell in love, though it took him another 2 years to do anything about it, because he was Sam. And this is the part of the story the town got right, even if they got it backward. There was a great love here, Sam and Rose. 41 years of marriage in the end. The town just never understood that the love wasn't the point of the second coffee. It was the soil the second coffee grew in. Those 2 years it took him are worth a word, because they tell you exactly who Sam was. He was not a man who knew how to want a thing out loud. He had a lifetime of practice at not asking for help, for company, for anything at all. And a habit like that does not break just because a person walks into the room you have spent years keeping empty. So he loved Rose the way a careful man loves, silently, from the corner stool, one extra refill at a time, telling himself it was enough. Rose, for her part, was patient in a way that had nothing to do with waiting. She did not wait for Sam. She simply kept leaving the door open and going on with her morning, until the day he finally worked up the nerve to ask whether she ever took her breaks anywhere other than this diner. She told him she'd been wondering how long that was going to take him. The two of them walked down to the river bench on her half hour and talked until her shift started again. That bench is still down there, by the way, at the bend in the water. The town will have more to say about it another time. What undid Sam in the end was not a grand gesture. It was a small one, naturally. He came down with a hard flu that winter and missed 4 mornings at the diner. And on the 4th evening there was a knock at the door of his room above the hardware store. It was Rose, with a paper sack of soup and bread she had carried up herself. And she did not come in, and she did not make anything of it. She left it, and told him to eat, and went back down the stairs into the cold. He stood there holding the warm sack, and he understood that he had been quietly chosen, and that he would be a fool to keep pretending he hadn't noticed. They married in the church hall on Maple Street, the same hall where, years later, another widower would dance with a pair of unworn shoes. But that is a different story, and the town keeps its stories close. Sam and Rose had no money to speak of and no big plans, and they were, by every account anyone in Ashford ever gave, quietly and unspectacularly happy for a very long time. They never had children. That was a grief in its season, and then it was simply a fact. And then, and this is the part that takes a long marriage to reach, it became a kind of room in their life they filled with other things, with other people. Because Rose's habit didn't stop when she left the diner. It got bigger. The diner stayed the centre of their whole married life. They never had much money and never seemed to mind it. Rose kept working the morning shift long after she could have stopped, because the morning shift was where she could see who in town was quietly struggling. And Sam took the corner stool every day before his own work, because the corner stool was where he could see Rose. The 2 coffees in those years were just 2 coffees, his and hers, sitting together on the counter while she leaned across it between orders, and they talked about nothing and everything, in the low voices of people who believe they have all the time in the world and do not yet know it is running. And the room they did not fill with children, they filled with the town. Birthdays they weren't related to, funerals where they were the ones who stayed behind to stack the chairs. A pot of soup that always seemed to be on the stove for whoever turned up needing it. People in Ashford grew up half-raised by the pair of them, without ever being quite able to say how. 41 years is a long time to be quietly good at a place. By the end of it, half the town was carrying something Rose had handed them, and most of them had no idea whose hands it had first come from. She was the one who brought soup to the house with the drawn curtains without being asked. She was the one who paid the Hartley girls' bus fare the winter their father was out of work, and never mentioned it, not once, not to them and not to anyone. She kept a running tab in her own head of who in Ashford was quietly drowning, and she went around all her life pulling people out of the water so gently that half of them never knew they'd been saved. And Sam, who had married her partly to stand close to that quality and warm his hands at it, learned it from her, slowly, the way you learn a language by living inside it. He was never as good at it as Rose, he'd be the first to tell you that. But he learned the turning away. He learned to give a thing and then look at something else so the other person could keep their head up. He learned from 41 years of watching his wife that the best kindnesses are the ones with no name attached. On her fourth shift, Nora was holding the coffee pot and had forgotten it was in her hand. Sam had stopped talking for a moment, the way a man does when the next part is the harder part, and the diner around them had gone very still. Out the window, the river was turning from grey to silver. Eleanor stood half in the doorway to the kitchen, her dish towel forgotten too, wearing the particular expression of a person hearing the real version of a story she has been telling wrong, with love, for over a decade. Nora wanted to ask what happened next. She didn't. She had learned that much already, 3 days in, that some stories you simply have to let a person walk toward at their own pace. So she set the pot down, quietly, and she waited. And after a while, Sam went on, because the next part was the part that mattered, and he had come this far. Now turn the picture forward, past the good years, to the part of every long love that nobody wants and everybody who's lucky enough to grow old eventually meets. Rose got sick. It was slow at first, the way these things are merciful enough to be slow. And then it was not slow at all. There were 2 years of it. Sam will not say much about those 2 years, even now, even to a girl on her 4th shift who has somehow gotten him talking. He'll only tell you that Rose stayed Rose right to the end of them, that even from a hospital bed, weak as river water, she was still keeping her quiet accounts, still asking him in a thin voice whether he'd checked on so-and-so, whether the family on Cedar Street had enough, whether the new boy at the diner looked like he was eating. He learned to do her rounds in those 2 years. That was the one thing he could do when there was so much that he couldn't. Rose could no longer get to the people she had always quietly carried, so she sent Sam in her place, with instructions whispered from the bed. Leave it in the mailbox so they don't have to see your face. Don't let on it's from us. Tell them it's from the church if they ask. He was clumsy at it. He would come back and report, and she would laugh at him, weakly, for getting some small detail of the disguise wrong, for very nearly letting somebody catch him and say thank you. And then she would send him out again the following week. It became, strange as it may sound, the closest time of their entire marriage. A man and a dying woman running a small secret operation of kindness out of a sick room in a town that never knew a thing about it. She was teaching him, though neither of them ever called it teaching. She knew what was coming. She was putting the habit into his hands, the only way she had left, by making him practice it while she could still stand to correct him. There is a kind of love that looks like nothing at all from the outside. No declarations. Just a man going out into the cold on a Tuesday to leave grocery money in a stranger's mailbox because his wife asked him to, and coming home to tell her it was done and watching her face ease. 41 years, and that was the truest of all of it. Not the wedding, not the good middle years, but the two of them at the very end, quietly making sure the town would still be looked after once she no longer could do the looking herself. The last clear morning they had together, Rose made him promise something. Not a grand promise. She didn't have the breath for grand. She told him she was worried about him. Not about the grief, she said. He'd survive the grief, everyone does. She was worried he'd go quiet again, that without her in the room, he'd shrink back into the careful, shut-up 23-year-old man she'd found at the corner stool 50 years before, and stop letting the world in and stop letting it out. "Don't disappear when I'm gone," she told him. "You did it before I found you. Don't do it again." And Sam, who could not say no to her and never once had, promised. He just didn't yet know how he'd keep it. You can't promise not to grieve, he knew that much. But he could promise not to vanish, and he meant to find a way. Rose's funeral filled the church hall on Maple Street to the walls. Half the town came, and a remarkable number of them stood up to say that Rose had once done some quiet thing for them in a hard season, which surprised even Sam, who had believed he knew the full extent of his wife's accounts and discovered at her own funeral that he had known maybe half. People he had never once connected to her stood and spoke. The kindness had run wider than even he had been able to see. And then the service ended and the hall emptied, and the town went home carrying the warm, settled feeling a good funeral leaves behind. And Sam went home to the first of the mornings. He tried at first to keep the promise the obvious way. He told himself he would stay out among people, stay connected, do all the things Rose would have wanted of him. But grief is not a thing a man can outwork with good intentions, and someone who has spent a lifetime learning to ask for nothing does not suddenly learn to lean on a town just because he needs to. Every offer of help he met with the same quiet, courteous deflection. "I'm fine, thank you. Don't trouble yourself." Until the offers naturally stopped coming. He had built the wall himself, brick by polite brick, exactly as Rose had been afraid he would. Rose died on a Thursday morning, early, before the light was up over the river. And for the first time in a long marriage, Sam was a man alone in a quiet house, exactly as she'd feared. The town came, the way a town does. The casseroles, the cards, the kind faces at the funeral. The people who say, "Call me if you need anything," and mean it, and then go home to their own lives, as they should. And then, the way it always does, the noise faded, and Sam was left with the mornings. The mornings were the worst of it. 41 years of waking up next to Rose, and now 41 years of habit waking him at the same hour into an empty house. He did exactly what she'd been afraid he'd do. He went quiet. He stopped going to the diner. He stopped going much of anywhere. He sat in the house with the curtains half drawn, a careful old man folding back up into himself, and he could feel himself disappearing, and he could not for the life of him find a reason not to. The neighbors noticed in the way that neighbors do, which is to say they noticed and then were not sure what to do about it. Someone left a casserole on the step that sat there until it spoiled. The man from 2 doors down knocked once, got no answer, and decided it would be wrong to intrude. That is how it happens in every town. Not cruelty, just the small, reasonable distances that people keep, any one of which is nothing at all, and all of which together can let a quiet man slip clean under the surface, while everyone agrees, quite sensibly, that it is none of their business. And Sam went under. He would sit at the kitchen table where the 2 coffees used to be, his and hers, and look at the one empty chair and feel the whole architecture of 41 years standing there with nothing left to hold up. He was not planning anything. It was simpler and quieter than that, and in some ways it was worse. He was just letting the lights go out in himself, one room at a time, and discovering that nobody, very much including him, seemed likely to come and switch them back on. This went on for the better part of a month, and it might have gone on for the rest of his life. There are men in every town who vanish this exact way in plain sight, and we let them, because a quiet old man is easy to look past. But on one grey morning, at the very bottom of it, for no reason he could name, Sam put on the grey coat, and he walked down to the diner on the corner, and he took the stool he hadn't sat on since before the funeral, and he ordered 1 coffee, and he sat there with nothing left in him at all. He didn't notice the man 2 stools down, an ordinary man, middle-aged, nobody Sam knew, a traveller maybe, or somebody passing through on the river road. Sam was too far inside himself to notice anyone. He drank his coffee and stared at the counter and thought about how easy it would be to simply stop. Not anything dramatic, just to keep doing less and less until there was nothing left to do. And when Sam reached for his wallet to pay, the waitress told him it was already taken care of. He looked up, confused, and the ordinary man 2 stools down was already standing to leave, already pulling on his coat, already turned away, the way you turn away, so the other person doesn't have to thank you and feel small. The man caught Sam's eye for just a second on his way to the door, and he said one thing. He said, "Rough morning, been there, it passes." And then he was gone, out into the grey, and Sam never saw him again and never learnt his name. Sit with what happened to Sam in that moment, because it is the whole of the story. A stranger had paid for his coffee and turned away. A stranger had spared him the indignity of being seen at the bottom of his life, and had done it with no name and no fuss and nothing wanted in return. And Sam, sitting there at the corner stool, recognized it. Of course he recognized it. He had married it. He had lived inside it for 41 years. It was Rose's habit, walking back into the diner in a stranger's coat on the worst morning of his life. He understood all at once 3 things that he had not been able to understand alone in his shut-up house. He understood that the thing Rose had spent her whole life doing was still out there, moving from hand to hand around the town and the world, with her name nowhere on it, exactly as she'd wanted. He understood that it had just reached him on the morning he needed it and couldn't ask, precisely the way Rose had once described it to a clumsy young man at this very counter. And he understood, finally, how he was going to keep his promise not to disappear. He did not move for a long while after the stranger left. The coffee in front of him went cold. The waitress refilled the other tables and let him be. And Sam sat there at the corner stool and felt something turning over in him that he had not felt in a month. Not happiness, nothing so large as that, but a kind of recognition, the sense of a hand he knew reaching him across a great distance, because it could only have been Rose. Not literally,
Sam was far too plain a man to believe in signs, and Rose would have been the first to roll her eyes at the notion. But the habit was hers. The turning away was hers. The whole grammar of what that stranger had just done to him, Sam had spent 41 years learning at her side. And here it was, finding him at the exact bottom of his life, handed down through a stranger who had no idea he was finishing something a woman had started decades before. Her kindness had outlived her by walking around inside other people. And Sam realized, sitting there, that he could be one of them. He couldn't bring Rose back. He'd stopped wishing for that. But he could do the one thing she'd spent 50 years teaching him to do. He could keep handing it down. He could put her habit back into the world himself every single morning with his own 2 hands and never sign his name to it and never keep score. So the next morning, Sam came back to the diner and he ordered 2 coffees. He drank one, and the second one he paid for and left full on the counter and slid down toward the door for whoever came in next carrying something heavy that day, the cold student, the tired mother, the man counting his change twice with red hands, whoever needed it and couldn't ask. He didn't watch to see who took it. The not watching was the whole point. Rose had taught him that part first. And that is what he has done every morning for 11 years. Not a cup for a ghost, a cup for a stranger. The town, looking at a quiet old man and a full cup, told itself the tender, obvious story that he was keeping a seat warm for his dead wife. And they were wrong. But they were wrong in a beautiful direction, because the truth was bigger than the story. He wasn't keeping Rosa's seat warm. He was keeping Rosa's whole life going, one anonymous cup of coffee at a time, in a town that never knew to thank either of them. Back in the diner, on her 4th shift, 19-year-old Nora sat very still while the old man finished telling her this. The grey light had come up properly over the river. Eleanor had come out from the back partway through and stopped, dish towel in hand, and listened to the end of a story she'd been getting wrong and passing on wrong for 11 years. When Sam was done, he stood up, the way he did every morning, and he slid that second full cup down the counter toward the door. But this time, Nora was watching on purpose. And so she saw what she'd see every morning from then on. A young man had just come in out of the cold. Somebody new. Somebody with that particular grey look of a person at the bottom of something. And the full cup was sitting there waiting for him, already paid for, with no name on it, and no one watching to see him take it. Nora watched the young man take the cup. He did not know it was meant for him exactly. He simply saw a full coffee sitting there and a tired old man who nodded at it as though it were nothing, and he was cold enough and low enough to accept a small mercy without questioning where it came from. He wrapped both hands around it. Sam was already turning away, already pulling on the grey coat, already not watching, just as he had been taught. And Nora felt the whole thing click into place at last. Not a ghost, not a shrine, a relay. 11 years of it, running quietly underneath a story the town had told itself in order to feel better. She kept the stool secret after that, the way you keep a thing that has been trusted to you. Some mornings the second cup went to a stranger, some mornings to a face she knew, and once or twice, on the very worst mornings, it went to someone Nora herself had quietly named to the old man the evening before, because she had started keeping a small list of her own, the way Rose once had, the way Sam did now.
the way it gets handed down from a woman to her husband, to a girl on her 4th shift, and onward to whoever is next, and none of them ever signing their name to a line of it. Nora never told the town the real story. Sam asked her not to, and she understood why. The moment you sign your name to a thing like that, it stops being the thing. So Ashford goes on believing its beautiful, wrong, tender little legend about the widower and his ghost. And every morning, quietly, underneath that story, an old man keeps a promise to a woman who has been gone 11 years, by handing her kindness forward to a stranger who will never know where it came from. So that is the second cup. Not grief held still, grief turned back into use. A man who was once saved by an anonymous kindness, paying it down every morning of his old age and never keeping score, exactly as he was taught by the woman he loved for 41 years and lost on the Thursday before the light. Most of us have a person like Rose somewhere in our story. Someone who did a quiet thing for us once when we needed it and couldn't ask, and turned away before we could thank them. You probably can't name yours. That's rather the point. They didn't want you to. The only thing they ever wanted was for you to do the same for somebody else someday, and not sign your name to it either. There's a full cup sitting on a counter in Ashford right now, going cold, waiting for whoever walks in carrying something heavy this morning. Maybe that's a person you know. Maybe some grey morning it's you. And maybe the truest thing you can do with a story like this one is to go and quietly be the second cup for somebody, and then turn away. There's more in this town than one stool can hold. 2 doors down from Eleanor's diner, there's a house at the edge of Ashford where the porch light burns all night, every night, and has for 2 years now, though no one has lived there since the day the door was last shut. The town has a theory about that too. We'll come back to them.